there are three dimensions of our problematic. And the first thing is that agriculture has an unusually wide agenda. Now, what I want you to think about here is if we were in this room and we weren't doing agriculture as a productive sector, but suppose we were doing something like power generation, electricity, yes? Contrast this with agriculture. Usually in low-income countries and lower middle-income countries, agriculture constitutes 20, 30, even 40% of GDP, typically constitutes 40, 50, 60% of employment. So if you've got goals in your economy about growth, jobs, and so on, then agriculture is really important. If you don't have mineral exports, if you don't have oil and gas and copper and what have you, the chances are that agriculture is one of the mainstays of your exports. So you've got a big export consideration. So you've got all of that lot, which is an agricultural agenda. Then the sad truth remains that when we look at the world's poorest people, the people on $1 a day or $1.25 a day or $1.50 a day, they keep changing the metrics, but the extreme poor, 75% of the extreme poor in the world are in rural areas, and most of those are either farming or they're closely engaged in trading, in the input chains, in distribution and so on, very closely associated with agriculture. So if you've got goals about poverty, it's with agriculture. If you've got goals about hunger and nutrition for both poverty reasons and for the production of food, so both food access and food availability, agriculture, again, yeah? And then think about all the various concerns of equity and fairness, social divisions, gender divisions, regional divisions. Agriculture takes place across a vast area. So if you're trying to hit goals of reducing the gaps between people in their incomes, reducing gender gaps, closing regional gaps, the chances are, once again, agriculture is quite big on the landscape. And the last element that you can see there is that agriculture interacts with natural systems. So if you've got interests in environmental sustainability, climate change, you name it, once again, agriculture is there. Now, the argument that we're making here is very simply this, is that when you look at your national plans, your strategies and so on, agriculture very often has to carry a ridiculous weight of expectations, yes? If we were doing electricity in this room, you know, we wouldn't really be expected to hit all of those goals, yes? It'd be about generating power and getting it to people. There'd be elements of that, but we wouldn't get the whole lot on our agenda. Now look at it this way. If you really want to be Machiavellian about this, if you hate agriculture, you can always take an agriculture program, you can evaluate it and say, oh look, it didn't do social equity. Oh look, it didn't do gender. Oh look, it didn't do conservation. It's rubbish, yeah? You can always take an agriculture program and tear it to pieces, yeah? Whatever happened to it, you can tear it to pieces. And if you think this is just a ridiculous think piece, those of you who are old enough, remember what social scientists did in the early 1970s to the Green Revolution in Asia, yeah? To our discredit, a generation of agricultural economists wrote incredible things between 1970 and 75. We wrote a whole series of books saying, Green Revolution, it's rubbish, yes? Because there were some early defects. Green Revolution did exactly what it said on the tin. It increased supply side. That's what it was meant to do. That's what it achieved magnificently. Early on, there were some social inequities, and social scientists went crazy. They could find a way to rubbish the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was never meant to do everything in the world. But it's an example of when you've got such a big agenda like that, you can always look at agriculture and say, it's failing, we're not getting it right. So this is just one of the realities of working in agriculture. We will always be criticized, we'll always be expected to do a remarkable number of things. Now, the next element of the argument says, unlike some things that go on in the public sector, agriculture is largely a private affair carried out in most countries by a very, very large number of small farmers, yes, over which government has very little control. Contrast this if we were working in education, health, or water supply, where we have a budget to provide education, a budget to run a health service, and so on. It's under our control. If we have objectives in agriculture, it's not under our control. We're trying to provide services, incentives, stimuluses, and so on for private actors to sort out their production and so on. So that again makes our task a little bit more complex. And the last element on this is that politically and administratively, agriculture is not a well-focused sector. So if we look at the administrative side, ministries that deal with agriculture, that provide the kinds of services that support agriculture, you're typically dealing with at least half a dozen ministries. So take the case of the CAADP commitment to 10% of the government budget to support agriculture. What percentage of that 10% should go to the Ministry of Agriculture? I would have thought actually not a very large share. Rural roads, for example, clean water, education, rural health, these are all very important things for agriculture functioning, yeah? So unusually, unlike, say, education or health, we don't have a single ministry dealing with all of the elements of rural development. We've got a whole set of ministries that have to work together. And as we've got in several countries, we've not got one Ministry of Agriculture, we've got it broken down into subsectors of agriculture as well. And then we have the political paradox on top of this, that despite the rural population being a majority in most countries which are lower middle income and low income, they usually do not have the political clout of organized groups in other sectors, in urban areas, and so on. The reason that you can't get a political focus on agriculture is probably beyond me. I was just looking on my machine right now, and there's a lovely essay on there by Derek Heddy and Shashi Kolavali from IFPRI, where they did a survey across Africa of how important the ministries of agriculture were. And it reported they had interviews with senior civil servants across, I think, about half a dozen countries in Africa, talking about why being appointed Minister of Agriculture in most countries isn't an important step. You know, it's just not a prestige ministry. They didn't explain why it's not a prestige ministry, but they just said, empirically, it isn't. That's what we see. So there is this political conundrum of why you can't get a big political push behind agriculture, but the simple fact is it's administratively unfocused. So that's the thought piece. It's there just to remind ourselves that if our challenges look quite tough, objectively there's a reason why it is quite tough. We're expected to do quite a lot of things with an atomized population of smallholders who we obviously can't command. We can only provide services and incentives, and we're doing so in systems where the administration and the politics is not necessarily lined up to deliver agricultural performance. Okay.